Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Decoding the Unknown. Today, the strange life and suspicious death of John McAfee. John McAfee was the virus guy, right? The antivirus guy, who then seemed to lose his mind. I remember first coming across John McAfee as a person when he made some insane YouTube video. And I swear, he had a gun and was doing cocaine, and there were half-naked women, and he was talking about how he has nothing to do with the antivirus company anymore, so people could fuck off. It was insane. He seemed insane. Today, we're going to talk about it all. Kevin wrote this for me. I've never read it before. We're going to explore John McAfee. And then he killed himself, Epstein style or whatever, in a Spanish prison, I want to say. Whatever it is, today's going to be wild. If you've ever owned a computer at any point over the last 35 years, you've undoubtedly heard of McAfee antivirus. And the chances are you've got a very poor opinion of the software. McAfee is widely known across the internet as being a horrific combination of spyware, malware, and bloatware that is far worse than any of the viruses it alleges to protect users from. Of course, this is just the common public perception of the software, not something Simon or I would ever attempt to claim as absolute fact. Yeah, honestly, I don't really know enough about McAfee antivirus software. I'm pretty sure I've had it at some point, usually probably bundled with a computer. But nothing beyond that. But it is a very popular opinion. So popular, in fact, that it resulted in the company's founder, John McAfee, making the second most influential internet upload of his life. On June the 18th, 2013, John uploaded a video to his YouTube channel titled How to Uninstall McAfee Antivirus. This is the video, isn't it? And he shoots the laptop or something.
Spoilers.
The video featured John in a Hugh Hefner-style robe surrounded by strippers and guns, and it was not a particularly helpful tutorial. After snorting a mountain of bath salts, John pulls out a gun and shoots the laptop as a means of uninstalling the antivirus program. It may not have been useful for people who actually wanted to help uninstall the software, but the video has received nearly 13 million views from people who were happy to see that John hated McAfee as much as they did. That is just the kind of guy he was, though. John loved to troll reporters, the media, and the general public just as much as he loved drugs, guns, and women. Sounds like a fun guy, right? Yeah, I mean, he must have been a billionaire, right? Early into tech, made McAfee antivirus, sold it, got rich, just having a wild-ass billionaire life.
Jealous.
Just before we continue with today's video, I want to say a big thank you to today's sponsor, Vessi, and their Stormburst shoes, which are just fantastic shoes. They're made with something called Dymatex, which is 100% waterproof. You could go all the way up to here, and your feet will remain dry. I'm basically always wearing Vessis. I got these Vessis on right now. These are I want to say they're the courtside, but they're not. I can't remember the name for them, but they're really cool. You'll find them on the website, but these are the ones I'm talking about today because it's winter. These obviously are nicer weather shoes, but they're kind of my slippers. I wear them around the office. I come into the office, I slip off my bigger shoes, and I slip on this pair of old, well-worn, very comfortable, holding it together Vessis. Years I've been wearing these, years. Vessi are just fantastic. They're the best shoes you could buy. I said they're waterproof, of course, 100%, not water resistant, waterproof all the way up to here. They're still breathable. They got fantastic grip on the bottom. So no matter the weather, no matter how freezing it is, you'll have good grip, which is great. These are the Stormburst. They've got high tops, they've got low tops, whatever you fancy. Don't wait for sunny skies. Stormburst is made for the messy middle of winter. Get 15% off your first pair at vessi.com/unknown, plus free shipping, plus a 1-year warranty, plus 30-day hassle-free returns. Nothing can go wrong with Vessi. And now back to today's episode. And hey, he probably was fun, so long as you didn't piss him off. But there's much more to the story of John McAfee than just a millionaire software developer. Oh, just a millionaire. Peasant. Who hated what the company he'd founded turned into. It's the story of a drug dealer, scam artist, crypto bro, alleged sex offender, alleged murderer, and 2-time presidential candidate. Oh my God, yeah, he did try and run for president, didn't he? Oh my God, John McAfee, your life. Who was found dead in a Spanish prison cell after taking his own life, I told you. Spain. What's going on with his life? Or did he? Before his death, John had explicitly stated that the US government told him they were coming to kill yourself. It's a weird way of putting it, but I guess that means he is alleging that they were going to set up a suicide, and that if he ever died in an apparent suicide, it was a setup and he was murdered. So let's investigate and try to decide if John really was murdered, or if his public statements were just one last attempt to troll the media. Early life. Much like this episode that was written by me and read by Simon, the life of John McAfee was created by a glorious alliance between the United States and England. God save us. John McAfee of the 596th Ordnance Ammunition Company was stationed in Cinderford in Gloucestershire, England, while serving with the US Army during World War II. While in England, John fell in love with, or at the very least knocked up, a British woman named Joan Williams. Their son John was born on the army base on September the 18th, 1945. Wait, can he be president? Can he be president? I thought you had to be literally born in the United States to be president. Maybe the army base is considered US territory, but I think you have, which is weird, because you could just be on holiday with your parents in, like, I don't know, Mexico or some shit, and your mum goes into labor early and you end up being born in Mexico, even though you've both got American parents, you were on holiday, and it's like, no, you can't be president, which is weird. Once the war ended, the family moved back to Virginia, where Don was from. In many ways, John's childhood was unfortunately normal. His father is described as being an abusive alcoholic who would beat John and Joan on a regular basis. Wait, doesn't seem very normal. That's not normal, is it?
It happens more often than you'd think.
For seemingly no reason. That's obviously not good, but it seems like it was pretty much par for the course for any child growing up in the 40s and 50s. Really? I don't really? I mean, I get people would smack their kids and stuff, but I don't think people were, like, for no reason beating up their wife and children. You gotta be, like, we're not that different as humans from when we were back then. And that just seems like so, not right. Like, I understand, like, I don't hit my kids. That would be insane. But, like, goddamn, like, I would get a smack when I was a kid if I was naughty. And I'm like, God damn it. No smacking the kids, but you deserve it. But, like, to actually hit them for no reason and your wife? It's like, no, dude, no. However, when John was 15 years old, his father shot and killed himself. That's the official account anyway, though there's heavy speculation that it was a murder staged to look like a suicide. It's ringing bells, isn't it? This speculation stems from interviews John gave to his biographer decades later, in which he appeared to slip up and heavily implied that he had murdered his own father and staged the scene. Unfortunately, after the death of his father, John began drinking heavily and using drugs himself. That didn't seem to hinder his studies, though, as he finished high school and went to study maths at Roanoke College in Virginia. But in order to support himself and pay for college, John was going to need a source of income. And over the course of his undergraduate career, there were two different jobs that he had. The first was essentially just a scam, but not the illegal kinds. John created his own personal enterprise, going door to door and selling people magazine subscriptions for free. Okay, I'm wondering where the money comes from. Okay, so he's selling them for free. He's learning how to do it. This job taught him that the key to business was confidence, and he made what he described as being a fortune from the job. Note that a fortune is highly subjective, since this was from the perspective of a teenager in the 1960s. Still, it gave him plenty of money to buy booze during college, which was the entire point. Wait, so how's he making money? You might be wondering how he's profiting off selling, Kevin and I, same page, selling free magazine subscriptions. Well, the subscriptions were totally free. The buyers just needed to pay for shipping and handling. Oh, no, this is like, yeah, we're sending you for free. $40 shipping. Basically, all he had to do was charge people more for their monthly shipping than it would cost him to buy the magazine at a newsstand, and he'd be making a profit. It's pretty clever, to be honest. This leaves us with just one important question. Did Simon just finish arguing with me and saying that this is a clever idea and not a scam, or did he go on a tangent about the 2 weeks he spent working at a newsstand? I've never worked at a newsstand. So I worked in a newsagent where they sell newspapers. I worked there for several months, Kevin. I'll have you know.
Look, semantics, whatever.
I did say it's a clever idea, though. It is a clever idea. It's not a scam. Unless he's like, shipping's free and people are signing up, then it's not a scam. Regardless, the whole point of a magazine subscription is that it's cheaper than buying every issue off the rack, so while not legally a scam, the business model was still designed to utilize John's charisma and confidence to exploit stupid people and overcharge them for a profit. Well, then maybe they shouldn't be stupid, Kevin. Anyway, that business got him enough money to pay for all of the liquor and beer that he wanted during college, but he also needed money for drugs. To that end, he began selling cocaine. Seems a bit of a catch-22 there, isn't there? As John explained in an interview, anybody that did as much cocaine as he did would inevitably start selling cocaine as a way to fund their own habits. Despite all of the substance abuse, though, John completed his degree in 1967 and went on to attend Northeast Louisiana State College to earn a doctorate in maths. This didn't last, though. It varies by college and degree, but part of the deal for being a PhD student is generally that you have to teach an undergraduate class. The flip side of that is that these doctoral programs are generally free for the students and usually include a monthly stipend, so it's not a bad deal, especially compared to how expensive an undergraduate degree is. Yeah, it is weird that the more advanced degree is less expensive, but then again, you have to teach. Got a few people I know who've done PhDs, and it's like, yeah, they have to teach. And they're like, I just want to research. I got to teach a stupid class. Now, I have no idea whether or not John was a good teacher, as that's not why he was expelled. But in the opinion of one of his 18-year-old students named Fran, he must have been a very sexy teacher because he got expelled for banging her. Fucking excellent. John McAfee, your life is fucking wild, dude. Like, from the earliest get-go, your life is fucking wild.
I'm a happy-go-lucky scamp.
Did you write an autobiography? Because I'd read the shit out of that. In John's defense, though, the two did get married, so he probably wasn't just exploiting his position of authority to sleep with her. Or maybe he was, and he just made an impulsive decision to marry her after getting expelled anyway. It's really hard to tell what was going through his drug-addled mind. After getting kicked out of his PhD program, John got a job with NASA, working as a programmer on the Apollo program. I get the feeling that John McAfee is extremely intelligent because he is on drugs and alcohol, he's selling cocaine, and he manages to avoid basically all trouble, make lots of money, and end up at NASA working on the Apollo program. I get the feeling John is doing a PhD in maths, which he gets kicked out of. After that, he got a job working for Univac as a software developer. For those who haven't heard of it, Univac was a big name in computing back in the days of punch card computers, though they went out of business in 1986. This job didn't last long, though, as John got fired after he was arrested for buying a bag of weed. Naughty, naughty boy. He's selling cocaine. That's why he gets arrested for buying some weed. His lawyer was able to get him off without a conviction, but he still needed a new job. He had a college degree and had worked for NASA, but he had also been expelled from another college, fired from his most recent job because of illicit drug use, and probably couldn't talk about anything related to NASA because it was all classified. But he did still have programming skills, so he put together a fake resume and got a job at the Missouri Pacific Railroad in St. Louis. Remember, this was the early 1970s, so almost everything was still analog. Missouri Pacific was in the process of trying to switch to computerized systems to route and schedule trains, so John was brought on for that project. Within 6 months, he'd built a system that was successfully optimizing all of the routes and schedules, something he did while high on LSD. Then one day, John made a discovery. He learned about a new drug he hadn't tried yet by the name of DMT. He showed up for work one morning with his bag of DMT and snorted a line. Isn't it that one that sends you to like another fucking universe, obviously in your mind? It didn't seem to have a noticeable effect, so he decided to snort the entire bag.
Kids, don't try this at home.
The exact implications of that are a bit hard to nail down, since I don't know what the DMT market was like back in the 1970s, or now for that matter. As best I can figure it out, an average recreational dose of DMT is 20 to 40 milligrams, not very much, and is usually sold by either the gram or half gram. But if Jesus Christ, you're buying 10 doses? Okay. But if Joe Rogan happens to be watching this video, you're welcome to correct me in the comments, Joe. Even if we assume that John's bag was half a gram, though, doing the entire thing would be fucking a lot of DMT. That's 10 strong doses all at once, which is the sort of thing that would break a person's brain. And that's exactly what happened. According to John, within an hour, my mind was shattered. He had no idea what people were saying to him, and the computer started spitting out schedules with trains routed to the moon. I mean, probably not in reality, but that was John's perception of what was going on. It didn't take long before he was hiding behind a garbage town in downtown St. Louis, hoping that no one would see him. It's reported that he was pretty much useless and out of it for 3 months. Fucking hell. I thought it was going to say like 3 hours. He's on a DMT trip for 3 months. He never returned to Missouri Pacific. They're like, what happened to John? Don't know, he just did a bunch of DMD and 3 months later, he's like, boys, where have I been? That obviously wasn't the end of his career, though. He took a number of relatively short-lived jobs at companies like Xerox, never staying for more than a couple of years. In 1983, he was working at a company called Omex. You might have thought that his little adventure with DMT might have scared John straight. I get the feeling the answer's going to be no, given his history. But it absolutely didn't. He didn't ever do DMT again, but he was still starting every day with a line of coke and polishing off a bottle of whiskey by his lunch break. Dude. The problem was that nobody really cared, because apparently John was a fucking genius. Yes. One of John's co-workers described working with him and said that even if he was shit-faced out of his mind, he was still able to easily solve problems that the combined might of the rest of the R&D department was unable to. He could ride up to work on his motorcycle just before noon, probably quite drunk then, openly snort cocaine off his desk, and his employer didn't even consider saying a word to him because he got results.
Different frogs, different times.
He's like House, like Dr. House. He's just brilliant. And everyone's like, yeah, he's on drugs. Yeah, but he does, he's a genius. God, I love this. And to an extent, John was determined to make every outrageous promise Omex had made to their investors a reality, quickly moving from one thing to the next. This resulted in a lot of failures, but if he couldn't make it work, then nobody else in R&D would have anyway. But eventually, investors lost their patience with the company's inability to deliver certain things, so funding began drying up. John was fired, which brought him to a breaking point. Before leaving Omex, Fran had divorced him. He also gave away their dog, so now he was unemployed and completely alone. Oh my god, I'm amazed that Fran stayed with him all this time. He spent 3 months high on DMT. She's like, John, where have you been? He's like, I have no idea, but I'm never doing DMT again. And she's like, yeah, you will, John. He's like, no, not this one. For days on end, he would lock himself away in his apartment, just drinking, doing drugs, and debating on whether or not he should end his own life the same way his father had. Fortunately, he recognized that this was a bad thing, so he decided to go and see a therapist. The therapist, in turn, recommended that he try attending Alcoholics Anonymous. At his first meeting, John broke down crying, so someone gave him a hug and told him that he wasn't alone. Apparently that was all he needed, and he remained sober for the rest of his life. Wow. This is like, I just feel like this is a big brain thing. Like, he's just like, no, okay, I get it. Gotta stop. Stopped. That's what he claims anyway, though some anecdotal evidence disputes this. There was also a really fun DUI arrest from 2015, but I'm getting way ahead of myself there. Wait, so he stopped drinking, but he didn't stop, drugs, right? After staying sober for a few years, John managed to get a clearance for a job working at Lockheed. And it was there, in 1987, that John read a magazine article that would change his life forever. An article about Brain, the world's first PC virus. In the city of Lahore, in Pakistan, there was a little shop called Brain Computer Services. It was run by two brothers, 24-year-old Amjad Farooq Alvi and 17-year-old Basit Farooq Alvi. Amjad had studied physics in school, but after graduating, he began to learn about computers. It started with an interest in hardware, and with Amjad quickly teaching himself to repair computers. This was the primary business of Brain Computer Services, though they sold software as well. You see, for our younger viewers who are used to buying everything on Steam, you used to have to go to the store to buy your software. Oh my god, I just realized I feel so old because I remember going to the store and they would have those discs sitting on a shelf and you'd pick them off and you'd be like, yeah, Microsoft Office. And now it's like, if it takes more than 14 seconds to download, I'm getting pissed off. I remember being in computer class when I was 18 years old, and the teacher was telling us about, I think it was like satellite internet or something, and how it's quite fast compared to like the internet that we had at school, which I think was, broadband at the time. It's like 512 kilobits a second or whatever. And I remember asking somebody like, wait, so you could download like a full CD's worth of data, which I think is about 650 megabytes or some such like that, and not have to get a CD? And he's like, oh yeah, you'll be able to do that in like 20 minutes in a few years. And here we are 20 years later. And it's like, god damn, 650 megabytes? And you're like, if that takes more than 2 seconds, are you like, what the fuck, internet? What the fuck? And it was expensive as fuck. Computer games like King's Quest retailed for $60 when it released in 1984, which is over $185 today. God damn! Unsurprisingly, professional software was even more expensive, often costing hundreds of dollars. We had a way around there, though. Software was sold on floppy disks, and you would install the files from the disks onto your computer, but once the process was complete, there was nothing stopping you from lending those disks to your friends so they could install it on their computers as well. Or if the disks were required every time you ran the program, you could just make copies of the disks to give to people. Yep, remember this? Floppy disks were really cheap. Microsoft Office would come in like a box, like a, those boxes that would keep files in nowadays or whatever. Like those. And it would just be stacked with floppy disks. And it'd be like, insert disk 24 of 32. And you'd be like, this is some of my earliest memories. At the time, there was little companies could do to stop this sort of piracy. You could include some sort of software key, but most people didn't even have a dial-up modem, so there was no way for a company to check how many people were using the same key. Instead, old software often relied on other forms of copyright protection, usually involving the user having access to something that came packaged in the original box. When booting up the software, you might be asked for a specific... Oh my god, I totally forgot about this! For a specific word on a specific page of the instruction manual. Jesus Christ, I completely forgot that was absolutely a thing. That was an okay solution. Wow, I just unlocked a memory from my childhood. Except people could just photocopy the manuals. To combat this, companies began printing whatever would be used for copyright protection on dark sheets of red construction paper that a person could read, but that you couldn't photocopy because it would all just come out as black. This wasn't an ideal solution either, as you could just copy the sheet by hand, but it was a pain in the arse. I don't remember that though. However, in 1986, Amjad had a better idea, or at least a more effective idea. Although his focus originally was on hardware and repairing computers, by this point he'd taught himself to program and was publishing his own software. He made multiple custom programs for clients, but his main creation was a piece of medical software used for heart monitoring. Unfortunately, Amjad soon caught wind that the software was being used all over Lahore beyond the clients that it sold it to. That's when he came up with the idea for his virus. The idea was that Amjad's software would install a virus that would load itself into the computer's memory. While there, the virus would infect any other floppies that were written to. Basically, anyone who tried to create an unauthorized copy of Amjad's software would instead create an infected disk. Amjad is a genius. This is very clever. Even though the legitimate software contained the virus, it would never do anything if the user didn't try to pirate the software, but anyone who copied the disks or tried to use the illegal copy would feel the full wrath of the virus, which was actually pretty minimal. It wasn't really a malicious virus meant to destroy the data or anything like that. It was just a nuisance. The virus would eat up a lot of the PC's memory and make the floppy drive read data much slower. People who weren't overly familiar with their machines might not have even noticed how much slower it was running. But for anyone who did realize it and tried to diagnose the problem, Amjad had left a very clear message. Inside the virus's code, not at all hidden, was the message that began, "Welcome to the dungeon," and ended with, "Beware of this virus, contact us for vaccination." And in between those parts of the message was the name, address, and phone number of Brain Computer Services, as well as a mention that the virus's software was copyrighted by Amjad. Mwah. This certainly feels like writing down your crimes. I'm down with this. Something we frequently advise against. So why would Amjad have flagrantly left all of his contact information easily findable within the code for the world's very first PC virus? Well, simply because he wanted the infected users to call him. If someone contacted him to complain about the virus slowing down their computer, Amjad would ask them, "Bitch, why did you steal my software?" Love it, dude. This is a cracking episode so far. While initially the virus remained localized to Lahore, the Alvi brothers made a somewhat bizarre decision. Despite clearly being anti-piracy, they began selling pirated software from the store. I'm anti-piracy for my own shit, but anyone else's, let's go. They would sell copies of professional software like Lotus 123, a popular spreadsheet program that retailed for $500 for just $1.50. Pakistanis who bought pirated software would receive genuine copies, but the brothers began loading the brain virus onto the copies of the software that they sold to foreigners. Oh, genuine copies, not like actual version, not like licensed versions, but real versions. They're just selling the dodgy ones to foreigners. I remember allegedly, I lived in Sri Lanka for like a year, and the internet there was terrible. And if you wanted to get software, you'd go to like the software shop and it would just be pirated. You'd just be like, wait, you don't actually sell genuine software? And they're like, it is genuine. And you'd be like, bitch, please. The rationale for this was the copyright law in Pakistan didn't extend to software, so the locals buying pirated software from them wasn't committing a crime. But, well, the other pirates needed to be punished. While that logic makes some amount of sense in a vacuum, it undermines the entire reason for creating the virus in the first place, as people copying their medical software apparently were not violating the law. Regardless, by selling infected floppies to tourists and backpackers, the backpackers just buying this spreadsheet program. I guess if you're on holiday or backpacking and you see it and you're like, wait, that's $500 back home. It's $1.50. I'll take it. Regardless, by selling infected floppies to tourists and backpackers, the virus quickly spread all over the world. One of the things that enabled it to spread so widely is that, like I said, it wasn't malicious, it was just annoying. An American who bought Lotus 123 from the Alvey brothers may have purchased an infected disk, but the software still worked. Because the software worked and most people didn't immediately recognize that their machine was slowing down, people kept copying and distributing the virus. Eventually, people discovered what was going on, though, and Brain Computer Services was inundated with angry phone calls from people around the world demanding that the company fix their computers. Although the virus had spread far and wide, nothing actually happened to the Alvey brothers. They never received any sort of punishment, and they're still in business today. Fucking hell. It's a long time later. It's like 30-something years later. Though the business has evolved from selling software. Unless they moved in the last few years, though, Brain is even still located at the same address, hidden with a virus. John first learned about brain virus from an article he read. Oh yeah, this is about John McAfee. In an article he read in the San Jose Mercury News. Although he was working at Lockheed at the time, John still had a number of other projects he was working on. Among the stranger ones was the American Institute for Safe Sex Practices. It was an organization that gave members identification cards showing the date of their most recent negative test for AIDS. Promoting safe sex during the AIDS epidemic wasn't a bad goal, but John was acting as an unnecessary middleman. After all, people could just show each other their negative STD tests rather than purchasing cheap little ID cards from John. He had also purchased his local bulletin board service, or BBS. I don't know what that is. Way back in the days before the web, the internet was primarily a collection of BBSs and also Usenet for anyone that had a Unix machine instead of a PC. These were text-based message systems, like a kind of internet forum, and they tended to be extremely localized. Your computer's modem would call the BBS that was usually just in some random guy's house, and each BBS could only handle as many concurrent users as the owner had phone lines, so usually one, at most two. As a small child, I thought the idea of BBS was really cool, but I want to take a moment to think about how limited the internet was back then. Imagine wanting to go online to your favorite website using a dial-up modem, only to be met with the disappointment of a busy signal because there was already somebody else looking at the website. God, the past. It's honestly wild that any of us had the patience to use the internet at all back in the day. Yeah, but we were also like, I'm sure we'll look back at it today and be like, oh my God, how did we use it? And it's probably like back then we thought the internet was fucking awesome. Just I remember like using the internet, you just look up video game cheat codes and stuff. You're like, they're just all here. You don't have to buy the magazine for the cheat codes anymore. Woo!
Simpler times.
Also, because every BBS tended to be extremely localized, it's reported that John would host pizza parties in his home for the users of his BBS. Many of these people became the early employees of McAfee Associates, which is kind of neat. Anyway, after purchasing the BBS, John tried to basically create a trade union for system operators called the National BBS Society. This never got off the ground, but John's involvement with his BBS still turned out to be very important. After reading about the brain virus, John realized what a terrifying prospect it was, and also commented on how brilliant its creators were, even if he disagreed with what they were doing. Sure, Brain wasn't a malicious virus, but it could have been, and maybe the next virus would be. Recognizing that people would need protection from this new type of threat, John wrote a program called Virus Scan. He said he wrote the original Virus Scan in a day and a half, a comment that a lot of people seem to take as self-aggrandizing exaggeration, but it honestly seems pretty realistic. Virus Scan was searching for and removing specific known threats, not searching for novel forms of malware. If John was even half the genius that people make him out to be, I have no doubt in his claims that it took that little time for him to code.
Simpler times.
Yeah, I believe it. He seems like an incredibly intelligent person, and this is a good but fundamentally simple idea. Once his virus scan was created, John uploaded it to his BBS as a shareware program. For anyone born after 1990, shareware was one of the most common ways that programs were distributed back in the day. Anyone was allowed to download the program and try it for free, usually for 30 days, WinRAR, at which point they would become informed that if they liked the program and wanted to keep using it, it sure would be nice if they paid some money. The software typically wasn't going to stop working if you didn't pay, but it sure would be nice if you did.
It was a simpler time. It was a better time.
What a different world we live in today. You pay a subscription for that motherfucking service. Even if you were born after 1990, there's a good chance you've encountered shareware in the form of WinZip. WinZip was probably the most famous shareware program of all time. I was thinking of WinRAR. And if you ever used it, you undoubtedly remember that it would always open with a dialog box reminding you that you were welcome to give them money, but that ignoring the notification didn't stop you from zipping and unzipping files. Good guy WinZip. Obviously, the majority of users weren't ever going to pay for shareware programs, even if the creators were only asking for like $5. But that was totally okay with John. Quite frankly, John didn't give a shit if users paid him to use a virus scan on their home PC, because that was never his goal. His goal was for the program to become so popular and seen as such a security necessity that people would install virus scan on their work computers, because that's where the real money was. Again, evidence of John being a very intelligent man. The plan worked, and Virus Scan began getting installed on company computers. And whenever those companies called John in a panic because something was wrong with their computers or they needed an update to the software, he'd remind them that it might be in their best interest to pay for a corporate license to use the software. That kind of makes it sound like it was some sort of mafia protection racket, but it was just an ingenious method of marketing and sales. It's called a free sample. It's not like it would be like going to Costco, taking a little piece of cake, and they're like, "Do you want to buy it?" You just can say no and walk away, and you don't get to enjoy any more cake. That's just how it is. And in fact, you could go back and get another sample, I guess, in this situation. Also, this may come as a shock to anyone who's used McAfee antivirus in the last 30 years, but John's software was actually really good. It was seen as the gold standard among antivirus programs, and not just because of his shameless marketing. Sure, John's marketing and fear-mongering helped improve his market share dramatically, but he was still selling a good product that met a legitimate consumer need. And not only that, he was giving it away to most people. It was just the companies he was charging, and only when they ran into trouble. It's like good guy McAfee. Within 5 years, Virus Scan was being used by half of all Fortune 100 companies, and they were paying millions of dollars in licensing fees. John's company, McAfee Associates, had virtually no overhead, yet they were making over $5 million per year from corporate licenses. It also sounds less like a company and more like a frat party, at least as John described it in later interviews. He said how employees spent their lunch breaks fencing and performing Wiccan rituals. Okay. And that there was an office game among the employees where they earned points for having sex in different parts of the office. The highest possible score was for fucking on John's desk, presumably while he was out of the office. That said, it's unclear how much of that was true and just John trying to create his own mythology. But while Brain may have been the impetus for the creation of McAfee antivirus, Michelangelo was the virus that was going to make John stupid rich. The virus was first detected in Australia in 1991, but news didn't really spread until some sort of virus conference in the Netherlands in April of that year. Michelangelo spread in a similar way to Brain. It installed itself onto the boot sector of a computer, and from there it would copy itself onto any floppy disk inserted into the machine, which would then infect any computer that those floppies were then inserted into. Once a computer was infected, nothing would happen. The virus was designed to spread far and wide, but it wasn't actually going to do anything until March 6th, the birthday of artist Michelangelo, hence the virus's name. Of course, it's assumed that the creator of the virus didn't choose the date for that reason, and it was probably completely random, or maybe it was the birthday of some girl who broke the creator's heart. We have no idea why March 6th were chosen, but it was almost certainly not because of an appreciation of classic art. Oh wait, so the community must have named it Michelangelo. I thought the virus somehow was, branded as Michelangelo, but that obviously is not the case. Anyway, once the virus did activate, it was about as bad as a computer virus could be. Michelangelo would erase the computer's boot sector and file allocation table, completely bricking the machine. Technically, none of the user's data was actually destroyed, but without the file allocation table, the computer had no way to know where one file ended and another began. Someone who really knew what they were doing could retrieve the lost data, but the average person couldn't. oh my God, is John going to make a program that fixes this? Oh my God, he's going to make so much money. Someone made accidental ransomware, except John is the one who's cashing in. The best case scenario for most people was to reformat their computer, reinstall DOS, and start from scratch with all of their previous files lost forever. This was a terrifying prospect, far scarier than the average computer virus, and it immediately started making headlines, something that John seized upon immediately. John did everything he could to ramp up the public's fear of Michelangelo to 11, obviously stressing the need for antivirus protection while doing so. He spoke of thousands of computers that his software had removed Michelangelo from, and that it was the third most common computer virus in the world. This ramped up even more at the beginning of 1992 as the activation date for Michelangelo drew closer. Oh wait, so everyone's just got it on their computer. It hasn't even bricked the computers yet. Sorry, everyone's just waiting for it to hit. So they don't even know. They just worry how bad it's going to be. They just know it's coming, and he's going to be able to fix it all. Did John McAfee make Michelangelo's conspiracy theory? To make matters worse, major companies like Intel had actually shipped products that were created on infected machines, meaning that the disks they were selling also contained the virus. This was pretty much the greatest free publicity John could ever have asked for. Not only was the virus spreading more, but even powerhouses in the computer industry like Intel weren't safe. Consumers had to do everything they possibly could to protect themselves, or they might lose literally dozens of megabytes of precious data. So much data. Dozen megabytes, probably about half a second of the video that I'm recording right now. This maybe more. Despite all the fear-mongering, or perhaps because of it and the efforts people took to protect themselves, March the 6th came and went with little disruption. Thanks to the power of time zones, by the time Americans were waking up to turn on the morning news, reports had already come in from Asia and Europe that Michelangelo was a total nothing burger. John had been on the Today Show days earlier, stating as fact that there were 5 million infected computers around the world, but when the dust settled, there were only 10 to 20,000 reports of computers losing data due to Michelangelo. Wait, so what happened? Did John just blow it all out of proportion to sell antivirus? That feels quite dodgy. That's way more dodgy than the magazine thing. But again, maybe John wasn't blowing things out in proportion with his claims. Maybe his software had just been that good at eradicating the virus. Oh wait, if everyone got it and it did, then great. Either way, this couldn't have gone better for John's company. Brain had caused him to create an antivirus program that was quickly adopted, but PCs hadn't been widely adopted yet, and the virus wasn't malicious, so it had all gone down with little fanfare. Michelangelo, on the other hand, was a media spectacle, and John had positioned himself as the hero in the story. In December of that year, McAfee Associates officially became incorporated, and they had their initial public offering before the year was over. It was a massive success financially, with the IPO raising $42 million, but it turns McAfee into everything John hated. The original company was a handful of people pulling in $10 million a year for doing virtually nothing except allegedly having sex all over the office. Now he had to answer to stakeholders, the SEC and the FTC. Yeah, this just seems very, very painful. I'm very happy just, not having investors in my company and stuff and all of this, because it's just you get to make all the decisions, and that's quite nice. Luckily for John, he had a mild heart attack. Obviously 47 years old is a bit young for a heart attack, but he had also spent decades consuming a truly heroic amount of drugs and alcohol. But this medical incident caused the company's board to bump John down from CEO to CTO, which theoretically allowed him to focus more on the technology and fun stuff. Still, he hated the vibe of the company ever since they went public, and he just wanted nothing to do with it anymore. So, in 1994, John sold off his entire stake in the company along with the rights to the name. Realistically, it was the best possible solution for absolutely nobody. Sure, John pocketed a cool $100 million, but his name would forever be attached to what became considered the worst antivirus program ever. And sure, McAfee was able to increase their profits more than 20 times over in just a few years, doing almost $500 million in sales in 1998, but their product was forever going to be linked by name to its insane and allegedly homicidal founder. But then, of course, there was the general public, who was forced to suffer with a garbage piece of software that inexplicably comes pre-installed on PCs and laptops from many major brands. I don't imagine it's inexplicable. I imagine there's some financial dealings behind the scenes there. And if you're wondering why McAfee didn't just change the name of their program, they tried that over a decade ago when Intel bought the company. The antivirus was briefly marketed as Intel Security, which John publicly thanked them for, but the name change didn't stick, so it's back to McAfee now. Regardless, with John no longer involved in the company, he now had lots of time and money to do whatever the fuck he wanted. In 1994, he founded a new company, Tribal Voice, which created Powwow. Wait, I remember Powwow, one of the world's first instant messaging programs. Wait, do I remember? Powwow sounds vaguely familiar, but I don't remember it being an instant messaging program. Weird. Maybe it was. Personally, I have no recollection of Powwow, as I was hanging out on IRC at the time, but I guess most of the features you would recognize from things like ICQ, Yahoo, and AOL Messenger all originated on Powwow. The one I remember was MSN Messenger. That was the big one with me and my mates. For the remainder of the 1990s, John kept a pretty low profile. He was involved in a number of Silicon Valley startups, but he and his $100 million largely stayed out of the media. And now for something completely different. Okay. In 2000, John purchased 290 acres of land in Colorado and set up a yoga retreat with himself as the instructor. For whatever reason, he had decided to go full spiritual guru, writing 4 books about yoga and meditation. At this point, he was basically a cult leader, so he did exactly what you'd expect a cult leader to do. He started dating one of his teenage employees, Jennifer. How old is Jennifer? Because there's a big difference between her being 19 and her being underage. Oh yes, John had married a flight attendant named Judy back in 1987, but they got divorced in 2002. That was potentially before the relationship with Jennifer began, but I can't find an exact date on that, so who knows. He wasn't exactly a one-woman kind of man, so the relationship may have overlapped. Running his retreat may have given John all the attention and teenage girls he desired.
Ew.
But he still wanted more. John was used to living on the edge, grabbing life by the horns, and insert third generic colloquialism here. Even if John's new cultish life had made him the center of attention, probably the center of at least one, oh god, squirt Bukaki, yoga, why do I have to imagine John, old-ass, and in my mind it's like old-ass John McAfee, was never going to provide the same sort of adrenaline rush that he was used to. And since hardcore drugs were no longer on the table, John was going to have to resort to something even more reckless to get his kicks. To that end, he purchased a 157-acre piece of land in New Mexico as the base of operations for his new passion, an emerging sport he called aerotrekking. It started with John taking flying lessons, only to accidentally fly into US Air Force airspace, resulting in him and his instructor coming face to face with a bunch of military men pointing guns at them. Except it wasn't actually an accident. His instructor had told him to fly under some power lines, but John flew over them instead, triggering the Air Force's radar. Flying under some power lines seems very dangerous for a trainee pilot or any pilot. After that encounter, he decided it was best to fly as low as possible. John and his instructor soon formed a club they called the Sky Gypsies, who were devoted to what they called aerotrekking. Basically, it was the sport of flying ultralight aircrafts. These planes are little more than motorcycles with paper wings, as there's no cockpit or anything to protect the pilot. It depends what sort of ultralight airplane. There are definitely some rigid ultralight airplanes with cockpits. But while these ultralight planes had to make a lot of safety concessions in order to keep their weight down, what they got in exchange was a complete and total lack of regulation. Now, I assume you're still unlicensed, Simon, but you did take pilot lessons, so you know much more about flying than I do. With the experience you have, how would you feel knowing that you could just buy an ultralight plane and start flying it today with no license and absolutely no regulations? Well, Kevin, I know it's something very well. You can absolutely do that. It's not. You do to fly like a technically ultralight airplane. You do need a much less complicated license, but there are, like, you can fly a paramotor or very, very light things without a license. Obviously, in unrestricted airspace. The only catch is that you have to fly extremely low and at dangerous altitudes to avoid entering restricted airspace. There we go. But there's also unrestricted airspace, but that isn't super high that you could fly in, I suppose. I'm sure that sounds incredibly appealing and not at all problematic, but I should probably mention that not all pilots go through the expense of buying a plane. Because ultralight aircraft aren't registered or regulated in any way, some people choose to just build their own in their garage instead. Look, I find this all extremely cool. It's like riding a I've ridden motorcycles, love motorcycles. Would I ride one? Fuck no. It's way too dangerous. Would I fly one of these? No, it's way too dangerous. But is it extremely cool? Beyond cool. And again, the whole point of this is to fly through canyons and stuff at extremely low altitudes, possibly so low that trees keep scraping the bottom of your aircraft as you quickly maneuver through rugged and potentially unpredictable terrain. I'd love to give you the statistics on how dangerous aero trekking is, but I can't. Because of the unlicensed, unregistered nature of this, and because the planes don't enter FAA airspace, the FAA doesn't track accidents, and the National Transportation Safety Board doesn't investigate them. What could possibly go wrong? He asked in the most sarcastic tone imaginable. The first thing to go wrong, though, was that there wasn't any infrastructure set up for this, so John bought land and set up 7 bases across New Mexico and Arizona, where people could land, store their planes, and resupply. The Sky Gypsies then became less of an informal club and turned into a school where John and his employees would train people who were interested in learning to fly ultralight aircraft. Honestly, John is just living his best fucking life, and I love it. Among those employees was John's 22-year-old nephew, Joel Bitto. Joel showed a lot of talent for flying and quickly began working as an instructor for John, despite only having 65 hours of flying experience himself. Jesus Christ. I got not even halfway through my pilot's license. I think I have 30 hours. And this guy's instructing with 65. This is emphatically not okay. And it ended exactly as you would expect. At 9:30 a.m. on November the 1st, 2006, Joel and his passenger, 61-year-old Robert Gilson, took to the skies. It was a clear day with ideal flying conditions, but the voyage ended with Joel crashing the ultralight aircraft into the side of a canyon, killing both of them. Unsurprisingly, John was sued by Robert's relatives for wrongful death. 61-year-old Robert got into that fucking plane on his own accord. He was facing a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, but that was only the beginning of his financial problems. John had a lot of investments around the country, and many of these investments were tied to real estate. As you may recall, there was a bit of a financial crisis in 2008 that was triggered by the housing market.
And then that happens.
What is that?
That's America's housing market.
John's fortune fell from a peak of $100 million to reportedly just $4 million. Of course, the $4 million figure was reported by John personally, and he later admitted it was a total lie. He made a big show of selling off his properties for pennies on the dollar and making sure the media knew he'd lost almost all his money. Not that $4 million still wasn't plenty. Yeah, but if you had 100, it's going to be difficult. He's got $4 million, but he's got land everywhere, and he's got a flying school. That's not a $4 million man's activities. Regardless, by publicizing his own financial collapse, he thought he could stop people trying to come after him for money. It's pretty clever. You don't sue people with empty pockets. It wasn't just lawsuits, either, of which there were multiple, not just one from Robert's family. People tried to take advantage of John and his apparent generosity all the time because people described him as being somewhat gullible and a horrible judge of character. This analogy will be useless to Simon. One of John's former friends likened him to a D&D character with 18 intelligence and 3 wisdom. Well, it's not completely lost on me. It means he's very smart, but not particularly wise. Essentially, he was smart enough to find a way out of any bad situation he found himself in, but lacked the common sense to stop winding up in those situations in the first place. Very nicely put, Kevin. And in 2009, John had an idea to escape all his problems. He was going to move to Belize. Technically, this wasn't actually his idea, as his lawyer had told him that any financial judgment that came down from a US court wouldn't be enforceable in Belize. He purchased a beachfront property on the island of Ambergris Cay, bringing a few hangers-on with him. Among them was Jennifer, as the two were still in a relationship. Right, but then you can never go home. If they bring a judgment down and they're like, oh, we want millions from you, and that's a judgment against you, if you go back, they're going to arrest you. Are they going to arrest you for a civil case? If you owe that much money? It's not going to be a fun time, however you look at it, right? Despite being with her for potentially 9 years at this point, one of John's first orders of business in Belize was creating a full-on harem. He was regularly involved with 7 women at once, though who those women were rotated. And they also weren't all women, as it's reported that there was at least one member of the harem who was only 16 or 17 years old at the time. Oh my. In interviews, John was always open about dating teenage girl in Belize because the age of consent there is 16, so technically it was all legal.
Well, that's all right then.
Definitely weird, but legal. How old is he at this point? 64! Oh, he's 64 years old. He was exactly 4 times the age of some of these girls. Jesus Christ. I forget if it was on this channel or Casual Criminalist, but I know Simon brought up the half your age plus 7 metric for socially acceptable age gaps on multiple occasions. As a fun bit of math, the only way it would have been possible for a girl to both be a quarter of John's age and fall victim to the half plus 7 metric would be if John was negative 28 years old. But it wasn't just women and girls. I don't know why I said it like that. It's Monday morning. I was like, and girls. But when I hear girls, it's like, I'll refer to like girls like adults, not literal 16-year-olds, John. But he was stockpiling, also a weird way to refer to women and girls. In Belize, he also had guns, lots and lots of guns. Wait, this guy was he running on the libertarian ticket? I think he started his own libertarian party, freedom, guns, yeah boy. He also had his own personal security force who he armed with these guns. Basically, John moved to Belize to build a harem and his own private military, and also to bribe public officials, which allowed him to gain residence far quicker than law allowed. That's the thing. Like, if you're worth, even 4 million, and you go to a poor country, I don't know, is Belize poor? Maybe. I think, is Belize, part of the Commonwealth? Am I imagining that? I think it is, right? But I don't think it's got a lot of money. And if you've got 4 million, let alone 100 million, things are going to get expedited for you. A few months after arriving in Belize, John went to a beachside resort for lunch. While there, he caught a glimpse of an attractive woman who was staying at the resort. He began talking to her, probably with the intention of adding her to his harem, only to discover that she was a 31-year-old Harvard researcher and microbiologist. All right. I mean, yeah, people go on holiday, don't they? Her name was Alison Adonisio, and she explained to John that her work was in a field called anti-quorum sensing. John's like, quorum, eh? Sounds a lot like harem. Would you like to join? Basically, quorum sensing is how bacterial cells communicate with each other. It was first discussed in the 1970s with regards to a specific bacteria, but in 2001 it was proven that quorum sensing existed across all bacteria. Alison's work was focused on trying to disrupt this communication as a way to neutralize bacteria, ideally creating a new class of antibiotics that would circumvent the problem of drug-resistant bacteria by not actually killing them, just disabling them. Well, it's 25 years later. Is that something we have? Because that sounds really cool. Or did Alison's research unfortunately go nowhere? Or did she just join John McAfee's harem and break things out? He's like, so you're studying quorums at Harvard, right? That sounds a lot like harem. John, stop! John was immediately interested in this idea, so he offered to hire Alison and build her a brand new state-of-the-art lab with whatever equipment she wanted. The offer was a literal dream come true, so she immediately took him up on it and moved to Belize to run her very own lab. Wait, you're working at Harvard. Doesn't Harvard, I know John McAfee's got lots of money, but it's Harvard. Aren't they at the cutting edge of all this shit? In February 2010, they co-founded a company, Quorum X, dedicated to the mission of revolutionizing the antibiotics industry. Unfortunately, while the job was theoretically supposed to be a dream come true, working for John was anything but.
You amaze me.
Alison was a real scientist trying to do real research, but even if everybody around John said that he was a genius, he was still a douchey Silicon Valley tech bro. Before douchey Silicon Valley tech bros, and an over-the-top hype machine. He started every new business venture with the philosophy of move fast and break stuff, even when that stuff had been his own nephew. Look, I mean, I don't want to, again, don't really need to defend John McAfee, but his nephew knew what he was fucking doing. He's an adult man getting into a wildly dangerous hobby. John wasted no time in trying to promote their venture, ignoring the fact that legitimate research takes time. But this was okay. If it was going to take years to properly perform the necessary experiments, they could just fake it until then. Where's this original Theranos? According to one witness, when the media was coming to interview them and show off the company's lab, John instructed an employee to fill beakers with coloured water to make it look like they were doing cool science shit. I mean, Alison genuinely was doing cool science shit, but her research wasn't as visually appealing to reporters as bottles of coloured water that would make them go, ooh, science. That's okay, it's just marketing. It took less than a year for Alison to become disillusioned with John, at which point she decided it was time to leave the company and go back to researching at Harvard. Pretty good, though. Alison, where'd you go? It's like, well, you know McAfee antivirus? Have I got a story for you? And he's got a harem. She may not have got to run her own lab with assistants working under her back in Cambridge, but at least, Harvard is in Cambridge, right? I'm like, wait, she was at Cambridge? I thought she was at Harvard. Oh, but at least she was working with people who cared about and understood science instead of having to deal with the whims of a hyperactive marketing machine who wanted to monetize a product that didn't exist yet. It certainly didn't help matters that John was becoming increasingly paranoid. He thought there were white men in black suits watching his property, likely spies from the pharmaceutical industry who were trying to steal their research. There were also seemingly unsubstantiated rumors that the nearby village of Carmelita was a major hub for international drug smugglers. Even though he'd told Allison that his property was in a safe area, his increasing insanity and the constant presence of armed guards became a bit of a concern. This feels like drugs. This feels like what happens when you do too many drugs. You know, you just done too much cocaine. However, according to Allison, when she tried to quit, it went about as bad as you could possibly imagine. She claims that when she tried to tell John she was leaving, he drugged her and then sexually assaulted her. Bro, John, that is not a good way for, employee retention. Simon, I've decided to leave the company. Have a sip of this coffee. Now, John. Obviously, John denied those claims and was never handled by the courts. It's not like there would have been any video evidence or anything like that anyway, so it all comes down to whether or not you believe John would have been capable of something like that. And I'll leave that for you to decide, dear audience. But bear in mind the man did go to Belize to start a harem. Well, he's dead, isn't he? So I can share my opinion. Doesn't seem totally out of character, does it? Sometime afterwards, John started a new relationship. Even though he insisted that he never drank or did illegal drugs since first attending AA back in the 80s, John became a regular at a place called Lover's Bar. It's possible the bar got his name because the owner was the proprietor of multiple brothels, but that may have just been a happy coincidence. Oh, okay, so he was. It's just about the name, allegedly. Regardless, the owner prided himself on finding customers exactly what they wanted. The owner first asked John if he'd be interested in some women, but he declined. If women weren't what John was after, he offered boys instead, brah. Again, John said no, but the owner wasn't one to give up. One day, John showed up and was introduced to a 16-year-old sex worker named Amy.
The evil rich people hurt children. I am a good rich person, so I do not hurt children. I simply wait for children to grow into troubled adults who no one would miss.
She was open about having been abused and sold for sex to dozens of men by her mother growing up. That's pretty fucked up. And also about the fact that she carried a gun and would not fall in love. And apparently, that's exactly what John was looking for. You're perfect. Come join my harem. Since he had grown up in an abusive home, John said that her story resonated with him. He saw himself and Amy as essentially being the same person, which is quite convenient since a lot of you are probably thinking right now how much John should go fuck himself. And he agreed, because Amy was quickly moved into his home as his new girlfriend. This has got Succession vibes.
Spoilers.
What's the dude's name? Connor? The older brother? who's like, he has a cool girl and he proposes to her. That they get married. This was the last straw for Jennifer, who moved back to the US after her failed attempts to demand Amy be thrown out of the house. She and John had been together for about 12 years at this point, and she had, oh sorry, I'm like Jennifer the scientist. No, the scientist was Allison. Jennifer's the wife. Christ. John, he's got a harem and a wife. And now Amy, a 16-year-old. Ah!
These people, they're evil.
But moving a 16-year-old onto the property, who everybody described as being visibly insane and dangerous as his new girlfriend, was a bridge too far. And I mean, it is. I'm just surprised that Jennifer's patience hadn't run out before this. Yeah, I'd be like, the bridge too far was about 12 years ago, John. Jesus. It turned out that she was right to want Amy thrown out of the house. Even though John had fallen in love with her, she didn't feel a goddamn thing for him. The population of Belize is largely impoverished, with massive income inequality. According to recent data, the average person in Belize survives on just $4 a day. Okay, so my answer about whether Belize was poor or not has been answered. $4 a day? Surely that makes it one of the poorest countries in the world. I can't even buy a double cheeseburger from McDonald's with that. And amidst, yeah, it's like, you go to Starbucks and you're like, yeah, no, I'll have a grande cappuccino, skimmed milk. And it's like, just that basic ass coffee is like $4. $5. Goddamn, Starbucks. That's how much people in Belize make a day. Have some respect. And amidst all of this poverty was John, the American millionaire. From the start, multi-millionaire. From the start, Amy had just planned to make him fall in love with her and then rob him. And her plan worked. At least the first half. One night, Amy got out of their bed while John was sleeping, grabbed his revolver out of its holster, and pulled the trigger. Maybe she got squeamish about murder, or maybe she really did feel something for him. Either way, she had missed his head firing into the pillow beside him. The sound blew out John's eardrum, but he was otherwise unharmed. Oh, that sounds pretty painful though. We've already established that John was extremely paranoid and surrounded by armed guards. So, well, what do you think happened to Amy? I would imagine the armed guards rush in and then blow her the fuck away. But the way Kevin's asked this, because I know how Kevin writes, I feel like Kevin and I are often on the same page. That is going to be what happens. So if you guessed that John bought her a house a kilometre away, you'd be correct. No, I didn't guess that, Kevin. He didn't want to break up with her. He just thought it would be better if she had her own place where she could sleep that wasn't right next to John and his revolver. That decision came a little later, though. The first thing John did after Amy tried to shoot him was he took away her TV and phone for a month. Bruh, you're treating her like a child. I mean, she is a child. She's 16. But, like, this is fucking weird, dude. In a later interview, he said, "When she tried to shoot me in the head, what I saw was a frightened child. I really don't know how to process any of that, and I especially don't know how John did. I'd hope this goes without question, but if you have the power to ground a person who you referred to as a frightened child, you should not be putting your dick inside that person." Kevin.
You know, he's right.
I don't want to think about it. And just like a child, Amy responded to the news of being grounded by arguing, "But I didn't even kill you." I feel like I'm staring down a void winnower right now. So let's just move on. I don't know what a void winnower is, Kevster. This happens in 2012, but it was hardly the most important thing that happened to John that year. In early April, a local politician had demanded a $2 million campaign donation, which John refused. Demanded. Oh, John. He's shaking you down. A second request, but John again refused to pay up. 2 weeks later, his property was raided by the gang suppression unit of the Belize Police Department. They arrested John on suspicion of possession of illegal firearms and operating an illegal drugs lab. When he was told he was being arrested because they believed he was manufacturing meth, John replied that it was an interesting theory, but that he hadn't sold drugs since 1983. He'd be like, "Guys, Google me. Just Google me. I'm not cooking drugs, bro." The timing of this made it seem like obvious retaliation for John's refusal to pay a bribe to his local representative. To be fair to the authorities, they did find a ton of guns on John's property, as well as a lab, but all of the guns owned by John and his security guards were legal, and his lab was just a regular science lab where people had tried to create a new form of antibiotic. There was no trace of illegal drugs, so John was released from custody without being charged. Eventually, John found a way to smooth things over with the authorities, though. He had set up Amy with a place to live in Carmelita, and she told him stories of how horribly crime-ridden it was. Wanting to keep the area safe, John built a prison and donated guns, batons, stun guns, pepper spray, and other supplies to the police department. He also paid police to patrol Carmelita during their off hours. He's doing this because that politician or whatever is leaning on the police, and John's like, "Bitch, I got more money than you. And your $4 a day country, let's go." The donations came on Thursday, November the 8th, with media outlets reporting that the hatchet was formally buried with regards to the short-lived feud between John and the authorities. And that would last about 48 hours. Oh no! You see, John had a neighbour that he didn't get on with. The neighbour, 52-year-old Gregory Fall, was another American expatriate. Gregory had serious issues with John, and especially with his dogs. John owned a bunch of dogs, which were described as loud, aggressive, and dangerous. Yeah, no, I'm with Greg on this one. John sounds like he'd be a fucking awful neighbour. Not only did Gregory frequently complain about the dogs, he also complained about the noise from the loud trucks that came and went from John's property at all hours of the night. Many of these complaints were made to John personally, though Gregory did file official noise complaints as well. Nothing came from all this complaining, though. The authorities apparently couldn't be bothered with something as minor as a noise complaint, and John didn't really give a fuck what anybody said. Yeah, that's why John would be a really, really, really terrible neighbour. The day after John's donations to the police, he discovered that some of his dogs had been poisoned. Oh, Greg, you're poisoning his dog? Dogs, plural, he had many. A couple were already dead, but John had to shoot 4 of them himself to put them out of their misery. It was never proven who did this, and John didn't actually think there was an obvious suspect. Even though he and Gregory butted heads, John maintained that Gregory would never have killed the animals because he was a dog lover. In fact, John claimed that all his neighbours loved dogs, just not necessarily his dogs, so none of them would have been capable of the crime. That's quite clear-headed, because the difference between making a noise complaint and poisoning someone's fucking dogs is quite big. And also, John is making enemies. He seemed to be alone in that assessment, though. Most people drew the conclusion that it was Gregory, as the most vocal opponent of John's dogs, so he was the most likely person to poison them. That perception became all too relevant on the morning of the 11th of November, when Gregory was found dead in a pool of his own blood, having been shot to death.
That escalated quickly.
Since people had assumed that Gregory was the person most likely to have killed John's dogs, John then became the prime suspect in Gregory's murder. I mean, Yeah, absolutely fair enough. The assumption was that the murder was his revenge for what happened to the dogs, which is a bit intense, to be honest. John had a different theory, of course. He wasn't the one that killed Gregory. The Belizean government had. By mistake. Obviously, the government had tried to kill John, but they got the wrong house. I'll leave it to you to decide which of those theories sounds more likely. I mean, I just think murder is a pretty fucking huge step up, even for John. Like, he doesn't seem like a murdery dude. Officially, they just wanted to talk to him as a person of interest, but John didn't believe that for a second. The government had killed the wrong man the night before, and now they were going to come and finish what they started. Throughout his entire life, John had always seemed to come up with a brilliant plan to escape any trouble he found himself in. Yeah, because he's very good at getting into trouble and also very good at getting out of trouble. And that day was no different. Short on time, he decided to evade the authorities by running out to the beach, burying his body in the sand and putting a cardboard box over his head. All right, that sounds ridiculous, and we only have John's word to go on for that, but it's not necessarily impossible. He may have escaped the police that day, but he knew that he was going to have to go on the run. It was time to get the hell out of Belize, but he couldn't do it alone. In order to flee Belize, John was going to need the help of his teenage girlfriends. Not Amy. Oh, God.
There's more than one?
Though she had been invited to come along as well, but rather his 18-year-old girlfriend, Samantha. Oh, yes, he was also going to need Rocco Castoro, the editor-in-chief for Vice magazine, to fly down to Belize with a camera crew and film his entire escape. You filming your crimes for a documentary, John? John felt that if he had reporters documenting his journey, that it would be harder for authorities to unceremoniously murder him and dump his corpse in the jungle, which he apparently assumed was their plan. I mean, he is paranoid, but also maybe. But hey, it's not like Vice was going to be directly responsible for John's arrest or anything. Life on the run. John laid low for about a month, hiding out and donning a variety of disguises. His picture was all over the media, and he's a very distinctive-looking dude, and he's also an American in Belize. And they're going to be like, yo, mate, hablo español? I don't even know what language they speak in Belize, but I assume it's Spanish.
Wrong, 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 wrong.
So everybody knew what he looked like, but they also had pictures of the rich, well-put-together American who was living in Belize. So the first part of John's disguise was to stop bathing and combing his hair, making him look disheveled or even homeless. He also used a variety of wigs and other disguises to keep himself hidden whenever he traveled in public, which was often just to see Amy. Because the only thing more disgusting than a 16-year-old being in a sexual relationship with a 64-year-old
I don't want to live on this planet anymore.
Is that same relationship, but with a 64-year-old not having bathed in weeks. Anyway, John had an interesting theory with the media. He frequently befriended journalists from various outlets so he could share his life story with them. Inevitably, John would burn all of those bridges when the journalist published something he didn't like, but he still had a lot of contacts. While in hiding, he released public statements through the media claiming that the Prime Minister of Belize was going to murder him if he was ever captured. The Prime Minister responded to these allegations by calling John paranoid and bonkers. Yeah, dude, I do think if they were going to kill you, I don't necessarily think they'd loop the Prime Minister in. You know, like hands clean, bro. There was a bridge John had yet to burn, though, which was Vice. And this was exactly the kind of story they were eager to cover. Rocco. Is Rocco the guy I'm thinking of? Is he the famous Vice dude?
In your own time.
Rocco Vice. Oh no, this is a different dude. Who's this? Wait, this guy started Vice? Wait, isn't there a guy called Sean or... Is it Sean? Sean Vice?
Don't mind us, you keep working.
I don't know, I can't remember his name. There's a dude. It's not this guy anyway. Rocco and a videographer travelled to Belize to accompany and film the escape from the country, and that footage later became the Netflix documentary Running with the Devil. Oh my god, have I not seen that? That sounds awesome. For anyone wondering about the legality of something like this, it's apparently completely fine. Vice wasn't there to help John escape, they were just documenting the process. And also completely fucking it up. Yeah, this... Dude, I don't understand. You are extremely wealthy, you're living in Belize. How have you not established an exit? Like, you live on the edge of the law, mate. It feels like there should be a tunnel out underneath your house, to underneath the beach, up to like an underwater lair under the sea where you get in a little narco submarine or whatever and sail on back to Florida or to what other non-extradition country that you want to go to. On the 3rd of December, Vice published a short article titled, "We are with John McAfee right now, suckers."
Okie dokie. It was just a little blurb saying that they were with McAfee, documenting his journey, and that they would release the footage in the coming days, by which they meant about 10 days later, which is when the documentary finally came out. But in addition to the short paragraph they published, the post also contained an image of John and Rocco standing together in the jungle. Turns out, that was a big mistake, and Vice were the suckers all along. Now, you might be thinking that there was something in the background of the photo that gave away their location. No, they're too smart for that, and they're in the jungle. It's two intelligent guys. But it was just trees and dirt. Not even a rainbolt could have pinpointed where in Central America they were by looking at that photo. Please don't tell me they left the EXIF data in there. If they upload this photo to Vice and someone at the police can just download it, right-click, properties, and find out the GPS location of this, I take back everything I said about John McAfee being intelligent, because holy shit, that is a hell of a mistake. Although, to be fair, it was Vice who did it. John McAfee would not let that happen. And I just assumed Rocco was smart because he started... Did they say he started Vice? Because Vice became a pretty large media empire, so... And then kind of fell apart, didn't it? What's Vice do these days? Vice used to have some cracking documentaries. Really enjoyed them back in the day. That's okay though, because any idiot with a right-click button could have figured it out. Oh no, the image files have a little something called EXIF data. Yes. EXIF contained all sorts of metadata, including the date, time, and fucking GPS coordinates where the picture was taken. And apparently nobody at Vice had the foresight to wipe the EXIF data before publishing the photo, which is beyond dumb.
I have no words.
According to that data, John was hiding out in Guatemala, which he had entered illegally. Originally, Vice tried to cover their asses by saying that they'd altered the EXIF date to give a false location, but this was incredibly stupid and nonsensical. No, you'll just wipe it. And either way, they're going to go check it out. The only reason they would have faked the location was to throw people off their trail, but immediately declaring it was fake would have completely undermined that. This was not a very clever play, was it, boys? More importantly, if Vice's claims were actually true, that would have meant they were criminals. It's pretty cool that journalists have the leeway to freely document other people's crimes, even in a situation like this, but if they had faked the EXIF data, that would have meant they were no longer mere documentarians and were actively aiding and abetting a fugitive. So yes, this little ruse didn't last very long, which is fine because nobody believed their lies anyway. The day after this little mix-up occurred, John released a statement saying that he was in fact in Guatemala. He then met with Samantha's uncle, Telesforo Guerra, who happened to be a criminal defense lawyer. John told Guerra that he was planning to marry Samantha, but this was undoubtedly a lie. Also, I don't know if that's going to endear you to old Telesforo there, because you're a 64-year-old man, and how old was Samantha again? Was she 18? 17? Holy shit. This is purely my speculation, but I imagine he wanted Guerra to see him as his niece's wealthy benefactor, rather than her creepy old abuser. Which is what he was, allegedly. The first order of business was to apply for political asylum. John believed that the Belizean government was trying to frame him for murder, or so he claimed, so they argued that he was fleeing the country because of political persecution. A day after the papers were filed, the verdict came down that no, he would not be granted asylum. The president of Guatemala made a statement that John's actions were that of someone trying to flee a murder charge, and there was no evidence of political persecution. He wanted to make it clear that wait, did he get arrested in Guatemala? Am I missing something? It's fact, it was in Guatemala. Okay, so he's just basically saying, yeah, I'm in Guatemala. I'm going to try and do the legal way out, fine. He wanted to make it clear that Guatemala was not going to be a safe haven for people trying to escape charges in other countries. John was then arrested and placed in jail for entering Guatemala illegally. While John had expected his asylum request to be granted, Guerra had a backup plan. He could file all sorts of injunctions and stuff that would buy them time in Guatemala before John was extradited back to Belize, but he needed time to file them. There was going to be about a 4-hour window where the Guatemalan government could toss John in a van and ship him back to Belize before any injunctions could take effect. Just the thought of being extradited to Belize made John's chest hurt. Rather a lot, almost like an elephant was sitting on it. Oh, I know this bee, he does have a heart attack, right? His left arm went numb too. Luckily, his jailers had a duty of care, so John was shipped off to the hospital. Vice was still following him at this point, and when medical staff began to undress John to deal with what seemed like a very obvious heart attack, he requested they not undress him in front of the cameras, which was a very normal way for someone in the midst of an urgent medical emergency to act. No, you'll just deal with it later. You'll be like, boys, do you mind cutting those the bits of me having a heart attack and getting naked because holy shit. Needless to say, John was faking the heart attack, something he readily admitted to on numerous occasions afterwards. He actually faked heart attacks on 2 occasions while in custody in Guatemala, ensuring he wouldn't be extradited to Belize, which is quite clever because they kind of have to believe you, because otherwise if you actually die, they're going to get in trouble. And he's also like 64-year-old, has had many drugs and everything, it's not exactly unlikely. After about a week, I guess the Guatemalan government decided they were done with John's bullshit, so he was deported back to the United States. Oh, John, really, you got away with it, mate. Because he's not wanted in the United States for anything, is he? And I don't imagine the United States and Belize have an extradition treaty. Well, maybe they do, I don't know. The libertarian dream. Being deported to the United States was fantastic news for John. Sure, he'd never shown up to court to deal with the lawsuit from the family of the man his area trekking company killed, and he now owed $2.5 million from a default judgment, money he had no intention of paying, but it's not like he was wanted for any crimes in the US. Okay, well, yeah, so this is like the second worst option. And he technically wasn't wanted for any crimes in Belize either. He'd been labelled as a suspect and a person of interest in Gregory's murder, but they never officially filed charges. Wait, can you not file charges against someone and still demand their extradition? That seems a bit much. As far as the US government was concerned, John was a free man, so he flew to Miami and decided to party it up on South Beach. As you do. In his first month back, John solicited the services of a 31-year-old sex worker named Janice. It was just another job for Janice, who had no idea who John was. But Suave knew exactly who John was and how much money he was allegedly worth. Suave's Janice's pimp, isn't he? And in case it wasn't obvious from context clues, Suave was the name of Janice's pimp.
Well done.
He demanded that she give him information about where John was staying, but for some reason she refused. Later on, the two ran into one another and they began dating. In 2013, Janice became John's third and final wife. After getting married, they moved to Portland, Oregon for a bit. Things went fine for a while, but eventually the couple got into a fight and separated. John moved to Tennessee and Janice, unsure what to do, called up her old pimp, and Suave knew exactly what to do. They were going to kidnap and ransom John. To who?
No, it's to whom?
He doesn't have any family or anything, does he? Or I guess you just ransom him to the lawyer or whoever's handling his financial affairs. It's like, yeah, no, you're only going to get it back if you give us this money. I guess he's got insurance against this kind of stuff, right? He's a rich dude. This never successfully happened, though, thanks to Janice. Just like the plot of about 90% of superhero movies, she successfully protected him from the danger that she was responsible for creating. Suave would instruct her to do things like leaving doors unlocked, and she always complied. However, she would do her best to steer John out of danger and leave little hints that he needed to keep an eye out. Janice is a terrible partner in a kidnapping. And sure, it thwarted the kidnapping attempts, but I'm not sure that was the best thing for John's mental health. He was extremely paranoid, convinced that the government of Belize and drug cartels were going to come and kill him. He had turned the Tennessee home into a fortress with cameras everywhere, barricades, and what he referred to as the most armed bedroom in America. Wouldn't most armed bedroom in America really be a bedroom? Wouldn't you just call it like you'd be sleeping in a safe room? He eventually got so paranoid that he unloaded a bunch of rounds into his own walls because he thought there was someone hiding in the air ducts. Dude, John is in trouble mentally. That was finally enough for Janice, and so she came clean about Suave's kidnapping plans and her part in them. Most people would have ended the relationship right there, but John had already continued dating Amy after she'd tried to shoot him in his sleep. So what's a little kidnapping conspiracy between a husband and wife? She had told him the truth, so it was all water under the bridge. So that's all right, Janice. We're 100% kosher, Janice, no worries. Now, you may be wondering how John was supporting himself through all of this. I assume he has like a few milli left over, right? Even if his fortune hadn't dwindled to only $4 million, he still spent a fuck ton of money in Belize, and he wasn't ever going to be able to recoup any of that by selling his properties or the lab equipment. There's no way to know how much money John had left when he returned to the US, but he was able to make money by doing paid speaking engagements. John was paranoid. He had been described as a psychopath by someone he hired to write his biography, and was potentially a murderer. But people still thought he was brilliant enough to pay him to hear what he had to say. Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. You hire John McAfee to give a talk, it's going to be an interesting talk, isn't it? Because as crazy as he is, it's going to be a good story. We'll get to his other primary money-making venture in a moment. Oh, is it going to be a crypto scam? Is this what... I feel like this was why he ended up in prison, right? Was he scamming people? Or was he dodging taxes? It was some financial crime, I think. We'll get to this other money-making scheme in a moment, but in 2015, after John and Janice had moved to Tennessee, he got pulled over and arrested for driving under the influence and carrying a firearm while under the influence. And you might be thinking, wait a minute, I thought John was sober ever since he started AA back in the 1980s. And sure, that's what he said, but if you've ever known any recovered addicts, about half of them are downing copious amounts of Adderall or whatever else drugs they can get a doctor to give them an unnecessary prescription for. While it does, yes, like a loophole, isn't it? It's like, no, I need 17 Vicodin a day. I've got a sore toe. I'm sober, except for the Vicodin. So it does seem that John stopped drinking or doing illegal drugs, but by all accounts he had no problem taking drugs that were not yet illegal or ones that he had been prescribed. And to be fair, I don't think I would consider John's prescription for Xanax to be unnecessary, especially since he told the arresting officer that as soon as his name was put into the system, that the FBI was going to come looking for him. Dude probably needed something much stronger than Xanax for his anxiety and paranoia. I don't know what drugs he needs, but Xanax is definitely going to help with that. While the video of the arrest was interesting to say the least, things could certainly have gone much worse. John had been prescribed the Xanax legally, and it appears to have been a new medication for him. He tried to argue that his doctor hadn't informed him not to drive until they saw how he reacted to the dosage, but it didn't matter. In Tennessee and many states, you can be charged with DUI for legal prescription drugs if they impair your ability to drive, which is completely fair, right? Although there are like fine lines, right? Because wasn't there a study saying like people on antidepressant drugs are more likely to be involved in car accidents because they are less afraid of danger and concerns and stuff like that? I feel like I read that ages ago. I don't know if I'm pulling something out of my arse right here. But then is that DUI? Back to John's other source of revenue though. He'd already spent years in Silicon Valley as a tech bro, so now that it was the 2010s, it only made sense for him to return as a crypto bro. John engaged in multiple crypto pump and dump schemes, netting himself a fortune. In 2017, he went so far as to say that if Bitcoin didn't reach $500,000 by the end of 2020, well, it's 2026 and it definitely hasn't, he would eat his own dick live on TV. A year or two later, he even doubled down, saying it would reach $1 million where he'd eat his dick. Obviously, neither of those things happened. But before he made that prophetic wager, in 2015, John decided that he was going to run for President of the United States. Oh, this section was called Libertarian, right? So he's running on the Libertarian ticket. Of course he is. Guns. He first announced his candidacy in September of that year as a member of the newly formed Cyber Party, but a couple of months later, he decided he was going to vie for the Libertarian nomination as well. And honestly, John McAfee should have been the Libertarian Party's wet dream. He was a self-made millionaire, a household name, and he firmly believed in all the party's ideals. For anyone unfamiliar with what the Libertarian Party believes in, they are essentially just anarcho-capitalists who throw out some lip service to ideals of social liberalism to make their party seem palatable to the average person. Which is, yeah, like, whenever libertarian is mentioned, I'm like, and I would say, I don't know, this is the thing. I'd say, like, I got some libertarian tendencies, but not in the American sense. Like, I really think, like, the whole social thing, the social liberalism, is a really important part of libertarianism. Otherwise, it's just conservatism. Right? And John was all about that. He didn't believe in any sort of regulations and thought the taxes were illegal. He also, it is going to be a tax thing, isn't it? It's tax and crypto pump and dumps, tax and fraud. He also argued that the free market should operate unrestricted and with no redistribution of wealth, which ignores the fact that the free market is inherently designed to redistribute wealth from the bottom to the top. Libertarian candidates, or any third-party candidates for that matter, have never done well in the US, but in 2016, they were going to have their big break. For the first time ever, the debate between the three Libertarian candidates was going to be aired on national TV. Unfortunately for John, he failed to win the nomination. I'm sure a lot of the Libertarian base loved his anti-tax policies, but it was hard to get people to vote for an alleged murderer. Or at least it was back in 2016. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a 2028 presidential ticket led by the ghost of O.J. Simpson. I mean, you never know these days, do you? It was around this time that McAfee's life really started to go downhill. He had been able to pump and dump a bunch of cryptocurrencies, but the government decided that maybe that shouldn't be legal after all. John had been paid to hype various crypto assets on Twitter, which he did without ever disclosing the posts were sponsored. After successfully hyping up the price, he and his associates would dump their investments and cash out, leaving a bunch of suckers with worthless tokens. Yeah, this was a whole thing. There were tons of influencers doing this shit. And it's like, I even got emails. Dude, the number of emails like in this time being like, do you want to start a crypto coin together? And I'm like, fuck no, this seems like a scam. And it's like, yeah, but you'll make money from it. You're the one doing the scamming. And I'm like, I don't see how you're really selling this to me. You sound like I'm a capitalist, love some capitalism, but try being a capitalist without being a douchebag.
Scam, 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 scam. It's a scam.
But like this happened all the time because nobody was really sure what the status of cryptocurrency was, and John became the SEC's test case for this. You don't want to be that. He was indicted on counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, and money laundering because of his crypto antics, though he was never actually put on trial for this. They couldn't put John on trial because he'd already fled the country to escape the other charges against him. Wait, what other charges? Remember when I said John thought that taxes were illegal? Uh-oh, John. Well, that wasn't just an attempt to pander to the libertarian base. He really put his money where his mouth was, which isn't going to be in the government's pockets, which was very far away from Uncle Sam's grubby little hands. Despite how famous the story of Al Capone is, John decided he just didn't want to pay taxes anymore. In January of 2019, he publicly declared that he hadn't filed taxes in 8 years. Bro, why you would just shut the fuck up? And he was never going to file them again. Why? At this point, he, Janice, and some bodyguards hopped onto his yacht and went on the run from the law. Months earlier, he had declared that he would again be running for president in 2020. So when he announced that he was fleeing the country, he also announced that he'd be running his 2020 presidential campaign in exile from international waters. Eventually, he dropped out of that race and tried to become the vice presidential running mate for another member of the Libertarian Party, but nobody wanted him on their ticket. Can't possibly imagine why. No, me neither, Kevin. I wonder why you'd want the guy who was accused of murder and is literally on the run for crypto scams and tax evasion on your ticket. Something else happened in 2019, though. Something that has remained really important. On August the 10th, 2019, in the Metropolitan Correction Center in New York, Jeffrey Epstein definitely hung himself. Please. And no, there was no connection between John and Epstein, at least not as of the most recent release of 3.5 million new files, which genuinely surprises me.
Give it time.
At first, I was kind of surprised John wasn't in the Epstein files, as they sure seemed like they could be best friends. But John was very open about the fact that he frequently slept with teenage girls, so there was no reason for him to fly to Epstein's pedo island in secret. John's like, I got my own island, baby! But even if they weren't friends, Epstein's suicide terrified John. A few months after Epstein's death, oh right, because he outlives him, right? John McAfee died after Epstein.
Spoilers.
A few months after after Epstein's death, John tweeted, getting subtle messages from US officials saying in effect, we're coming for you, McAfee. We're going to kill yourself. I got a tattoo today just in case. If I suicide myself, I didn't. I was whacked. Check my right arm. Below the message was a picture of his right arm with $whacked tattooed on it. Is that like a crypto thing? Because crypto coins have the $sign in front of them, right? Many of you may be thinking that's a very weird way to stylize the word. If you want to leave the E off for some reason, that's fine. But why put a $sign at the front? Crypto bros will immediately know why. But the question was answered at the bottom of John's tweet, which contained a link to his personal website where he was selling the whacked crypto coin. Because of course he was. Bro, did you not learn I guess he doesn't care anymore because he's on his yacht in international waters. Because what's the point of being a high-profile figure in crypto if you can't exploit literally everything for money? In the summer of 2019, John docked his yacht in the Dominican Republic, and he was arrested for possession of all sorts of illegal firearms. The yacht was searched for weapons, and they were confiscated, but after 4 days, he was released. Eventually, I guess Dominican Republic doesn't have extradition with the US? They wanted him for the tax stuff. He was cleared on the crypto SEC scamming, but they wanted him for the tax stuff, right? Okay, so I guess no extradition. Eventually he made his way to Europe, where he thought he would be safe from the US government. Bro, you are gonna be much safer. You went to the Dominican Republic, they arrested you, they did not extradite, and you're like, you know where I'll go? Europe, because they're not friends with America. Dude, I don't know if there's any European countries that don't have an extradition policy with the US, but it doesn't feel very likely considering how closely they're all allied up.
Me feel
impossible.
Or at the very least, he thought he could keep himself safe. He still used disguises and even hired body doubles to throw authorities off his trail, but eventually, authorities were going to catch up with him. On October the 5th, 2020, John was arrested in Spain at the behest of the United States. Well, there we go. He remained in prison for almost 9 months while the Spanish National Court handled the question of whether or not to extradite him. That seems a bit much. Can't you just give him an ankle monitor? Although I suppose if you got an ankle monitor, if you could run really fast, then you're just like, fuck it. On June the 3rd, 2021, the court finally authorized John's extradition to the United States to face trial for all of his financial crimes. Hours later, he was found dead in his cell from apparent suicide. Many people did not believe that official narrative, though. John had made it clear that he believed multiple governments were trying to kill him, and he'd even made that tweet saying if he was ever found to have killed himself, that, well, he didn't. There was another, even more interesting tweet he made a few months before getting the whacked tattoo, though. In June of 2019, John had tweeted, "I've collected files on corruption in governments. For the first time, I'm naming names and specifics. I'll begin with a corrupt CIA agent and 2 Bahamian officials. Coming today. If I'm arrested or disappear, 31 plus terabytes of incriminating data will be released to the press," which is a fuckload of data. Although he didn't use the actual phrase, it was clear to people that John was threatening a dead man switch of epic proportions, which is really smart. If you've got shit on people and they're threatening to kill you, a dead man switch is a fucking good way to go. I'm surprised Epstein didn't have one of those.
This was poorly planned.
At over 300 gigabytes, the Epstein files contain millions of documents, images, and video revealing massive amounts of corruption and criminal behavior. And John was claiming to have 100 times that amount of incriminating information on multiple world governments. Of course, John said a lot of things. He had convinced a reporter that the goal of his antibiotics lab in Belize was to create a female version of Viagra. And in 2018, he made a bunch of tweets and statements convincing a surprising number of people that he was attempting to join a whale club. Wow, okay, I just assumed I was on the wrong page because that's insane. But yeah, John McAfee is kind of insane. To make that claim even more ridiculous, he didn't even say they were fucking captive whales. Instead, members would swim alongside the whales in the ocean, somehow matching their speed, and insert their penises into the whale. Hopefully I don't have to explain this, but no human in the world can come anywhere close to swimming at the same speed as a whale. What about Michael Phelps? Could he fuck a whale?
No.
So, was this dead man switch a real threat, or was it just another attempt by John to troll the media? Or maybe it was less of a troll and more of a bluff? Yeah, I don't think this would be a troll. Even if he doesn't, saying that he does is a decent deterrent. For many people, however, the answer was revealed in John's last Instagram post, which was made a few days after his death. The posthumous post was signed just a picture of a giant letter Q. Shortly afterward, the account was deleted. That's bizarre. The theories. Now, obviously, there are going to be 3 main theories surrounding John's death. The first is the official story, that he took his own life after hearing about the extradition order. The second is that he was Epsteined in his cell. And the third is that John isn't actually dead. Well, that third one's a bit absurd because, they've got his dead body, right? It's not like he disappeared. He was documented in prison. The idea that John was murdered is by far the most popular, though there's a lot less evidence for this than with Epstein. That said, the circumstances surrounding his death and the subsequent investigation by Spanish authorities certainly do raise a lot of questions. Yeah, he was threatened with being extradited to Belize for potential murder, and he was trying to wiggle his way out of it. And now he's being extradited back to America for financial crimes, and he kills himself. It just seems a little bit like, look, I'd much rather go to America financial crimes prison than I would go to Belize murder prison. Right? So it does seem a bit weird that he killed himself for one, but not the other. But who the fuck knows? John McAfee kinda mad. According to the Spanish investigation, there was absolutely no evidence for anything except suicide. There was CCTV footage from the jail where John died, which showed him killing himself, and the autopsy confirmed what the footage showed. For many people, that might sound conclusive, but the thing is, the CCTV footage and the autopsy were never released. Spanish authorities investigated, decided the case was straightforward, and presented "Trust me, bro" as their only evidence. And you know what? Fine. I mean, this was a high-profile death of someone who explicitly stated that they would never kill themselves. So actually, wait, it's not fine, but they seem to think it was such an open and shut case that there was no reason to reopen the investigation or release their findings, which is fucking bizarre. Release the footage. How is there not clamoring for releasing the footage? What's going on? There was just one glaring problem with the official story. Not only did they refuse to release the video footage or the autopsy, they also didn't release John's body for years. It took about 2.5 years before John's body was finally sent back to the United States, at which point Janice learned that it had been improperly stored for the first 6 months and thus she would not be able to have an independent autopsy performed. Which isn't suspicious at all. Except it fucking is. Despite these long delays, though, Janice did claim that she was shown the CCTV footage from the prison where John died, and if her story is to be believed, there was clearly something suspicious. Okay. According to her version of events, John was still alive and breathing when the guards found him. She said they'd tried to perform CPR on him, but they didn't even remove the noose from around his neck before doing so, and by noose I mean a shoelace or something, but her point largely remains. She said that as a trained nurse, she knew that the first thing you do before performing CPR is make sure the airway isn't obstructed, so it was insane that they didn't remove the ligature. Yeah, but also people make mistakes in the heat of the moment, and you are a nurse and they are like prison guards. So they're somewhat less medically trained. This is largely true, but it kind of glosses over something really important. It's true that you need to make sure the airway is clear before performing CPR, but that's actually the second thing you do, not the first. Yeah, I mean, the first thing you do is, like, make sure that they're actually not breathing. Otherwise you just make it out. The first thing you do is confirm that the person is not breathing, exactly, because there's no reason to perform CPR on someone that is breathing on their own. I have no idea why she would claim the guards performed CPR on John, if in fact he was still breathing when they found him, and that whole thing calls into question her entire story. But to many people, that discrepancy in her story didn't matter. And in a broader context, it still might not have. Even if we ignore Janice as being an unreliable source, and I absolutely believe that we should, it's still well documented that the official autopsy was never released and John's body was inexplicably held in Spain until the end of 2023. That is incredibly bizarre, and it was the sort of thing that was only going to fuel speculation, which of course was further fueled by Janice's claims. Yeah, for God's sake, just release the footage. Like, we don't know, we'd like to know, it's really suspicious, Spain. So if John was murdered, who did it and why? Well, no specific person has been named. It's all a bunch of conspiracy theories about government officials or possibly organized criminal enterprises. And to be fair, John had pissed off a lot of people and multiple governments. Most of the talk is about the deep state and 3-letter agencies in the US government, though some believe it was corrupt officials in the Spanish prison system who orchestrated the murder. There doesn't seem to be any clear motive for Spanish officials to murder John, but other governments might have motive, particularly the US, if the claims of having 31 terabytes of compromat on US officials was to be believed. I haven't heard the word compromat in a long time. I like it. Again, though, John was known to lie all the time, or at the very least to troll. He made it well known that he enjoyed trolling people, especially those who took themselves too seriously, though he would be very offended at the idea of being called a liar. Besides, nobody could possibly have that much evidence of a major conspiracy involving all sorts of politicians and billionaires, right? Wrong, because Epstein sure as fuck did. Yeah, I mean, like, this is being recorded. I don't know how long it'll be till it goes out, but this is just after, like, a week ago, the 3.5 million Epstein files were released, and it's like, fucking hell. But it was still a metric ton of incriminating pictures and correspondence involving countless politicians and wealthy individuals. But there may have been another person with just as much compromising information. A man by the name of Rusty Shackelford, which doesn't sound like a real name. Rusty Shackelford. He sounds like an explorer from the age of, what was it called? Was it the Age of Exploration? Something like that. Like Shackleton. I'm sure Simon has no idea who that is. I absolutely don't. But many of you at home will have immediately recognized the name. Rusty Shackelford was the alias used by the conspiracy-obsessed Dale Gribble on King of the Hill to keep the government from tracking what he was doing. I've seen a few episodes of King of the Hill. I always find it quite enjoyable. But it was one of those shows where this was before, you had Netflix or whatever, and so you'd have to catch it on TV. and sometimes I'll just catch it on TV and watch it and enjoy it. But that was about it. It was also the name of a YouTube account that appeared in 2019 to upload drone footage from Epstein's Island. The uploads began before Epstein's death, and they continued until the authorities raided the island. Rusty even had drone footage of the raid itself. Is he flying a drone in from neighboring islands to film this? That's pretty cool, Rusty. In one video, the drone was outside the window of a building being searched by the NYPD and FBI. The police spotted the drone and began trying to stack and tape cardboard boxes to obstruct its field of vision, and they spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to cover the window with cardboard. One of the officers then finally realized they could just close the curtains. Maybe they just didn't want to go inside and disturb the crime scene, because if you're bordering it up from the outside, then it's kind of because you can't be that dumb to not think about drawing the curtains, right? Right? Please.
What you're doing is completely stupid.
That's some good work, boys. The YouTube account was eventually taken down, though you can still find re-uploads of the videos. The name Rusty Shackleford, even shows up in dataset 8 of the Epstein files with regards to his YouTube channel. The file in question, it's yeah, Rusty, you got named in the Epstein files. You'd be wait, I was the drone guy. Is that sure you were, Rusty, named in the Epstein files? The file in question seems to be an internal communications between police, probably the NYPD, and a government official. It's all redacted, so it's impossible to know who, but the letter is addressed to Officer Redacted. Regardless, the letter talked about one video in particular uploaded by Rusty that contained footage of a laptop in one of the buildings on Epstein's Island, a laptop that the authorities recovered. Clearly, Rusty Shackleford was trying to collect information about Epstein and his associates and trying to do so anonymously, hence the use of a conspiracy-themed cartoon alias. So imagine my surprise to discover that Rusty did an interview with the publication Rooster magazine. It wasn't an in-person interview, of course, but he still communicated with one of the journalists for the magazine. He explained that he'd been surveilling the island in one way or another for 22 months. He's a citizen vigilante or whatever. A citizen investigator. The identity of Rusty Shackleford has never been confirmed, but there is only one specific name that has ever come up in conversations about the person: John McAfee. Oh shit, people think John McAfee is Rusty Shackleford? Even back in... I didn't put that together. It's surely it's just some kid. John McAfee is too busy with his harem. Even back in 2019, before John's own suspicious death, people immediately tied him to the account. Think about it. He claimed to have all sorts of compromising information about important people. He was hidden on a yacht somewhere in the Atlantic, and despite trying to maintain his anonymity, Rusty wasn't able to resist talking to the press. If Rusty Shackleford was going to be someone well-known and not just some random QAnon enthusiast, surely it had to be John. Yeah, but statistically, surely it's just a random QAnon enthusiast. If that were the case, then maybe John really did have a lot of incriminating information about people, and he was trying to collect more of it as his own insurance policy. Very, very smart. That's what a lot of people believed, which is why they believed that whoever killed Epstein in his cell did the same thing to John over the same information. Yeah, but John was smart, and he said he had a dead man switch, which I guess he didn't. Another theory was that John was killed because he knew the answer to one of the internet's biggest mysteries: the identity of Satoshi Nakamoto. Wait, that's the Bitcoin dude, right? The pseudonym of the guy who created Bitcoin. And the reason the US government was willing to kill John to keep this information secret was because they were the ones who created Bitcoin in the first place, specifically the NSA. Given how much Bitcoin has been used to do crimes, and I imagine launder money and all of this shit, I don't imagine the American government was super keen on making Bitcoin. According to the theory, Bitcoin was created by the government essentially as a psyop. The mission was never for Bitcoin to be a major success and drive the price to the insane values it's at today. The goal was just to psychologically condition people to become accepting of digital currencies. No, why? The US enjoys its hegemony on fiat currency with the dollar. This was all done to pave the way for the adoption of central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. And of course, CBDCs would bring us one step closer to the globalist agenda. We are deep in conspiracy hole right now. I mean, this is an episode of DTU. It's kind of amazing that aliens haven't showed up yet. There's just one thing, though. These murder conspiracies assumed John had access to highly sensitive information, but he also claimed to have a dead man switch. Most media outlets refer to the dead man switch as being a speculative conspiracy theory created by QAnon thanks to the Q post on Instagram, but I'm not sure why. He may not have used the phrase, but his tweet about 31 terabytes of information that would be released if he was arrested or disappeared is pretty explicit. John definitely claimed to have a dead man switch, but the secrets he was hiding have never been revealed. Can you imagine if it's just, he had all of this and it just went wrong, and instead of like typing in 5 days, he typed in 5 years, and any day now 31 terabytes of shit is just going to drop and blow the world apart? Or have they? One theory is that the information, or rather the key to unlocking it, is hidden somewhere in the blockchain for the whacked crypto coin. Alright, I'm genuinely unsure how this is supposed to work, but nobody has found anything anyway, so it's probably not true. Yeah. But if the dead man switch hasn't been activated, that leaves fans of John with only one possible option. There are some who believe he's still alive and on the run.
Yeah, he says he's not dead. Yes, he is. I'm not.
In 2024, there were multiple reports of him being seen in San Salvador for the Bitcoin halving party. Though, no idea what that is. Though there isn't Bitcoin halving, wouldn't that be quite bad news for all the people who have Bitcoin? Though there weren't any pictures of him taken. Another reason people suspected John hadn't died was the Q post for Instagram. This one is really easy to explain, though. Although John owns the @official John McAfee Instagram page, he wasn't actually the person to post on it. He publicly stated multiple times that someone else ran the account for him, and that person must have just decided to feed the conspiracies that people were creating. John wouldn't have wanted it any other way. No, indeed. There are also those that believe the dead man switch wasn't activated because it was destroyed. The day after John's death, a condo building in Miami collapsed. It was reported that not only did John own a condo in the building, do I remember that condo collapse? But he had previously tweeted that he was keeping the 31 terabytes of data in his condo in Miami. That makes no sense. You'd keep that 31 terabytes of data on the cloud because you'd want backups and multiple copies and a way for it to be released that doesn't rely on the power in your apartment being on. Of course, both of these things were lies. He didn't own a condo there. Oh, okay. And the screenshot of the alleged tweet was fake. But the news still made the rounds, and since that happened immediately after his death, a lot of people immediately fell down the conspiracy rabbit hole before having time to find out it was all fake. Besides, why would somebody as paranoid as John go through all the trouble of setting up a dead man switch only then to tell the entire world where it was hidden? That's pretty fucking Bush League. Yeah, and he's not Bush League. He's as crazy as he is, he's also very intelligent, or was very intelligent. Realistically, the switch was never activated because it never existed. It was, and all of my things about saying it's like 5 years from now, no, I don't think it existed. I think it was a bluff. It was probably a combination of a bluff and a publicity stunt. Then again, John did know a lot of people with whom he engaged in illegal or at least highly questionable activities and financial dealings, so it's possible that he really did have sensitive information he left with someone. It's also possible the person in control of the dead man switch is just as paranoid as John, so they're too afraid to leak it to the public for fear of their own safety. Wrap up. There are a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding John's death, but personally, I don't buy any of them. I'm guessing Simon didn't either, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I'm kind of like, I don't know if he killed himself. I mean, release the fucking footage, Spain. In my opinion, John really did end his own life. He was 75 years old and about to be extradited to the United States to face trial and a potential sentence of 100 years in prison. Holy shit, his financial crimes must have been real bad. There's no way he was ever going to get that much, but at his age, any meaningful sentence would have been a life sentence anyway. Everyone who knew him said how brilliant John was, but had finally got himself into a position that he couldn't find a way out of. I really don't think it's unrealistic to believe that John decided it was better to just end his life there rather than spend the rest of it in American prison. It certainly makes sense with the timing of his death coming mere hours after the extradition order came through. So as long as John was in a Spanish prison, there was always the chance that he could find a way to avoid extradition and be set free. After all, it's not like he was being charged with any crimes by the Spanish government. Yeah, okay. I think, I do agree with Kevin. I think it's weird the Spanish didn't release that stuff, but it does seem like the thing about him being 75 as well is like a really good point. He's an old ass man by this point.
Silence, whippersnapper!
And he's had a hard life, so you don't imagine he's like not a hard life, but like he's not taking care of himself. But once the extradition was finalized, the game was over. Maybe he could weasel his way out of the fraud and money laundering charges, but they had him dead to right on the tax stuff. Yeah, because it said, I'm never paying them again, and I never have. It's like, dude, you're like publicizing your crimes. John hadn't just evaded taxes, he had grabbed a microphone and openly told the IRS to go fuck themselves before running away to international waters. No defense attorney in the world could have beaten those charges, so there was no chance that John would ever walk free again. He was smart enough to know that, so I'd wager he just decided he'd already had a good run and that it was time to say goodbye. Many people will counter that assessment by bringing up his tattoo and the tweet in which he said he'd never take his own life, and yeah, John did say that. But as I already addressed with the whole f***ing whale club thing, John said a lot of things. Now look, I'm not denying that he was paranoid as fuck and genuinely thought people were trying to kill him. I just don't think that that's what the tattoo or the tweet was about. That tweet was just an advertisement for his new cryptocurrency. John was already on the run at that point, so it's my opinion that this was one last pump and dump for the road. The fact that he could tie the coin to Epstein's death and his own paranoia was just a brilliant piece of marketing. Looking at the price history of Whacked, the coin was created, I don't think this is going to go well, at the end of August in 2019, so about 2 weeks after Epstein died. It also takes some amount of time after a coin is created for it to be listed on any exchanges, so it was likely created even closer to Epstein's death. John's tweet about his own potential demise didn't come until 3 months later, at the end of November, showing that there was plenty of time to think this through. My guess is that when news of Epstein's death broke, John immediately had the idea to make Whacked as a way to exploit and monetize the news. In the time between creating and listing it, however, I suspect he realized he could tie himself into the equation as well as really increase its marketability. I imagine that's why there was such a long delay between him creating the coin and finally pushing it. I admit it's undeniable that the life of John McAfee was truly insane. If someone created a character like him in a work of fiction, it would probably be ridiculed for being far too outlandish. There's going to be like a Barry Seal type movie about this, right? Because it's a fucking good-ass story. As such, it's hard to believe that this man who was larger than life would have such a boring death. I know it's a boring death, but it really is the most believable option. I do still have some questions, like why Spain took so long to return John's damn body to his widow, but the questions that remain unanswered aren't enough for me to suspect foul play. This isn't a case like JFK, MLK, or Epstein, where there was clearly something going on besides the official narrative. For John's death, the official story really does make sense. To me, anyway. Maybe Simon and our viewers are screaming about how obvious it is that he was murdered. No, I don't think so. Spain released the footage, and I think it will show him dead by his own hands. I think that's just the most likely thing.
Do you remember Occam's razor?
Yeah. Simple things are true.
Close enough.
There's one final question I just can't figure out, though. In 2016, during John's crypto arc, he tried to found a new crypto security company named John McAfee Global Technologies. This led to a lawsuit and countersuit between John and Intel, who owned McAfee Antivirus, over the use of the name. They eventually came to a settlement, and as part of the agreement, John was not allowed to use his own name in the name of his new company. This just begs the question of why Intel was so desperate to maintain ownership of the name of one of the most reviled pieces of software to ever plague the market. Well, I imagine because it makes them some money. Because that's what companies like. Money. That has been an episode of Decoding the Unknown, quite a long one, I should think. If you want to buy a signed script, you absolutely can. They are available at the merch store. Signed right here. I really enjoyed this one, Kevin. I hope you did do as well, dear listener. If you're listening as a podcast, why not leave us a review? That would be much appreciated. And I'll see you next time.